It was an ordinary Saturday afternoon in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The sun was out, a soft breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass, and children's laughter echoed faintly down the street. For most families, this was a picture of peace. For one mother, it was a well-deserved break. After a long week of juggling work, house chores, and errands, she decided her 2 young children should spend some time outside. They had been cooped up indoors, full of restless energy. So, she set up a few toys in the front yard, chalk, a jump rope, a plastic ball, and watched as her children began to play freely. The yard was nothing unusual. A simple patch of grass with a small tree in the corner and a low hedge along the walkway. But to the self-proclaimed neighborhood enforcer, the woman known as Karen, this harmless scene was enough to ignite fury. Karen was the type who believed she had been appointed guardian of the Homeowners Association rules. Every lawn, every car, every decoration had to pass her scrutiny. And while the HOA had guidelines, she took them to an entirely new level. From behind her blinds, Karen spotted the children. She saw the chalk dust, the bouncing ball, and the jump rope snapping against the driveway. To her, this wasn't innocent play. In her mind, it was chaos, a violation of neighborhood peace. She grew more agitated by the second, muttering to herself about rules, appearances, and proper conduct. Rather than walk over and say anything, Karen reached for her phone. Her fingers trembled with righteous indignation as she dialed 911. She told the dispatcher there were unsupervised children causing disturbances in the street. She exaggerated the details, describing the situation as if it were dangerous, even implying neglect. In her world, this was a crisis that demanded immediate intervention. Meanwhile, the mother sat on the porch, sipping iced tea, only half aware of the storm brewing across the street. Her kids laughed and scribbled bright flowers and smiley faces on the driveway with chalk. The normalcy of it all gave no hint of the trouble that was about to unfold. The first sign came with a distant wail of sirens. At first, the mother thought nothing of it. Police cars often passed through the area on their way to busier streets. But then, the sound grew louder, and flashing lights appeared at the end of the block. 2 patrol cars rolled up slowly, their presence commanding silence as neighbors peeked from behind curtains and hedges. The officers stepped out, their radios crackling. Karen emerged from her house at the same time, striding with a sense of victory, pointing toward the children as though she had just uncovered a major crime. Her face was set in a grim line of satisfaction, convinced that justice was about to be served. But as the officers looked from the children to the calm mother on the porch, confusion spread across their faces. Something about the call they received didn't match what they were seeing, and that was the moment the situation began to turn. The mother rose from her chair, unaware of what Karen had done, but prepared to defend her family. The stage was set for a confrontation that would spiral into something Karen never expected. The officers approached cautiously, their expressions caught between professionalism and disbelief. They had been dispatched on an emergency call about unattended children in possible danger, but what stood before them was a calm scene of a mother watching her kids laugh and play. The driveway was covered in chalk drawings, the children were safe, and the woman on the porch looked relaxed and attentive. Karen, however, wasted no time inserting herself into the situation. She marched across the lawn, gesturing wildly at the children, and demanding the officers do something. Her voice carried over the quiet street, sharp and accusing, insisting that the mother was neglecting her children and allowing them to disrupt the neighborhood. To her, every laugh was noise, every chalk drawing was vandalism, and every bounce of the ball was a violation of order. The mother listened in shock as the accusation spilled out. Only then did she realize that Karen had been the one to call 911. The weight of it sank in. This wasn't a misunderstanding between neighbors. Karen had escalated harmless play into a police matter. The mother's calm demeanor shifted into something more protective. Her children clung to her legs, sensing the tension in the air. The officers began asking questions. They needed to know if the children were supervised, if they had been wandering into the street, or if there had been any danger. The mother answered plainly, pointing out that she had been there the entire time, seated on the porch with her kids in full view. She explained the simple setup, a safe front yard, some toys, and 2 kids enjoying a sunny afternoon. Karen interrupted repeatedly, trying to twist the narrative. She spoke of HOA rules, of safety hazards, of how this kind of behavior would bring down the neighborhood. She insisted the officers write a report, that they make the mother comply. Her tone grew more frantic, her words laced with anger rather than reason. The officers exchanged looks. Something wasn't adding up. This wasn't a case of neglect, and it certainly wasn't an emergency. It was a neighbor dispute dressed up as a crisis. The more Karen pressed, the more they began to question her intentions. Why had she exaggerated the details to the dispatcher? Why was she so intent on criminalizing children's play? As the situation unfolded, more neighbors stepped outside. First one, then another, drawn by the flashing lights and rising voices. Whispers rippled through the small crowd gathering at the edges of lawns. Many of them knew the mother and her children. They had seen them play before, never causing harm. And many of them also knew Karen, her constant complaints, her obsession with rules, her knack for confrontation. The officers began to redirect their focus. What had started as an investigation into the mother's actions was shifting toward the one who made the call. They asked Karen for clarification, pressing her on why she described the situation as dangerous when it clearly wasn't. Her answers grew shaky, defensive. The sense of control she carried when she first walked out to meet them began to slip. The mother, still standing firm, realized the tide was turning. Karen had invited the spotlight onto herself, and now the officers were looking closely at what they were dealing with. By the time the officers requested Karen's identification, the crowd of neighbors was no longer whispering quietly. They were watching closely, some even recording on their phones. The story Karen thought she was writing was no longer hers to control. And as the officers returned to their patrol car to verify her information, the atmosphere shifted entirely. What began as a false emergency call was now becoming something far more serious. The officers sat in their patrol car for several minutes, radios buzzing as they ran Karen's information. The neighborhood grew quieter, though the air carried a sense of anticipation. The mother stood with her children close by, offering them reassurance, while the crowd of neighbors lingered at the edges of their lawns. Everyone seemed to know that whatever happened next would reveal the truth behind Karen's behavior. When the officers stepped out again, their demeanor had shifted. They were no longer humoring Karen's frantic demands. Instead, they approached her with a level of seriousness that made her falter. One officer explained that the call had been reported as an emergency involving unsupervised children in danger. What they had found, however, was nothing of the sort. Her exaggerated claims had wasted police resources, pulled officers away from genuine emergencies, and stirred unnecessary panic in the neighborhood. Karen tried to argue, her voice rising in protest. She insisted that she had simply been looking out for the community and that the children had been running wild. But with the evidence right in front of them, the calm mother, the safe yard, the children laughing at her chalk drawings, her words carried no weight. The officers reminded her that making false or misleading emergency calls could carry legal consequences. The crowd of neighbors leaned in, their phones still recording, capturing every word. For once, Karen was not in control of the narrative. She was being held accountable in front of the very people she had spent years policing with her constant complaints and threats. One officer issued a formal warning, making it clear that if she repeated such behavior, charges could follow. They also explained that her call would be documented, a permanent mark against her reputation with local authorities. Karen's face flushed red, her hands fidgeting as she realized how quickly her plan had backfired. What she had intended as a moment of victory had turned into public humiliation. The mother, though shaken, stood tall. She had not needed to raise her voice or argue. Truth had spoken for itself. Her children, now more curious and scared, peered at the flashing lights as if they were part of a spectacle. For them, the memory of this day would likely fade into a story their mother told. But for Karen, it was a turning point she could never erase. As the officers wrapped up, they turned once more to the mother, assuring her she had done nothing wrong. They encouraged her to carry on with her day and reassured the children that they were safe. Then, with the crowd dispersing and the flashing lights fading, the patrol cars slowly pulled away. Karen retreated back into her house, blinds snapping shut behind her. But the damage was done. Neighbors who had once tolerated her complaints now saw the extent of her spite. Word would spread quickly about the 911 call, the police response, and the embarrassment that followed. The mother and her children returned to their afternoon, this time with a stronger sense of unity and the quiet support of the neighborhood around them. Karen had called 911 thinking she could intimidate and control. Instead, she had exposed herself, leaving behind a warning for anyone who thought petty grievances were worth turning into emergencies. And so, what began as a peaceful day of children playing outside ended with a clear message. Sometimes, the biggest mistake isn't breaking a rule, but trying to enforce one that never existed. Do you break any rule? Please comment. Do like, subscribe for more story like this.